A childhood dream having become an unexpected reality, I'm now part of the VF-213 Black Lions, turning wrenches on F-14 Tomcats and dancing a mechanical ballet on the stage of a United States aircraft carrier. The mechanical ballet of naval aviation is performed by a team of Airedales maintaining high-performance aircraft under difficult and sometimes outright adverse conditions. So you're part of a team that's maintaining a high-performance aircraft. And in our case for the 14s, these were almost 30 years old by the time I was working on them, and they leaked. The 14s were a very leaky aircraft because they were old. You're under the aircraft working, getting dripped on by hydraulic fluid and oil. Occasionally fuel, and that was a bad. If there was a fuel leak, that was, the aircraft was hard down. It was not going anywhere if we detected a fuel leak. When we were at Fallon, Nevada, the Naval Air Station is very strict about flight line cleanliness. So one of the things you learn very quickly when you deploy to Fallon, Nevada is the Fallon Shuffle. It's a great little dance that involves your aircraft taxiing out to the runway, and then you and the rest of the maintenance crew getting buckets of kitty litter, dumping on the ground, grinding into the tarmac and cleaning up to get any spilled oil, hydraulic fluid, or anything else up so the flight line stayed clean. It's called the Fallon Shuffle. Two of the best friends you would have working on an F-14 is your speed handle and your safety wire pliers. Now, these are two of the types of tools I used in VF-213. These specific items in my hands I did not use at the squadron. I got these from a military surplus site a couple years ago just to add to my trophy wall with some of my other F-14 memorabilia, because these are kind of the symbol of being an aircraft maintainer. We would safety wire just about everything to make sure it stayed in place, and learning how to use the safety wire pliers was one of the first skills I acquired at VF-213. Use this, and when you lock the pliers in on the safety wire, maintain tension, we would actually just pull on this handle. Now, I'm spinning it out like this, but when you pull on this handle with this locked into the safety wire, this thing spins. That wraps that safety wire into a little pigtail. We would then use the plier part to take that pigtail and loop it around itself, almost tying it into a knot. That ensured nothing came loose. You don't want loose connections popping in an aircraft at flight. It doesn't matter if it's a civilian jet or military fighter. That's bad juju. Plus, these are great pliers. Great set of pliers, slightly needle nose in shape, got a set of wire cutters in there too. So these things were very useful. They're also very tempting sometimes if somebody was being a real Badinsky, just like, speed handle, another one of our best friends. The Tridair tip is a little tip that goes on here. It's like a socket wrench in your car, and it goes into a Tridair fastener. The Tridair fastener is a brand of fastener the Navy uses. Well, it's common across the aviation industry because as much of a pain in the butt as they were to use sometimes, they're great fasteners for holding aircraft structures together. They're also a nightmare if they got stripped. Yeah, I learned a lot of new four-letter words working with those things. My vocabulary really increased being a maintainer. At minimum, there are at least hundreds of thousands of fasteners in that aircraft. The downside is that means every single fastener, I mean, every single panel has got a metric butt ton of fasteners you got to go through. We only had a couple of places where there were panels that were on hinges with major locks that we could flip the lock and the panel opened up. But fortunately, not every component required 1,000 Tridair fasteners. The lantern pod was pretty easy to mount. The lantern pod goes under the wing at Weapon Station 8, so didn't matter where the aircraft was parked on the flight deck, we just bring the pod out on the skid, jack it up, fit it into place, lock it in, tighten down the connectors. Easy day, relatively speaking. The tarps pod was a different story. Tarps pod, because it's so tall on its skid, and we had the weapons rails on the front of the jet, could not come in the front of the jet. We'd have to bring it in back between the engine exhausts. Aircraft are parked tail over water to save space. That means we back them up to the edge of the flight deck until their wheels hit the scupper and the tail sticking over water. Flight deck control hated us because to get the tarps pod on the jet, we'd have to pull the jet forward, taking up valuable flight deck space, and we needed at least 10 or 15 feet clearance from the end of the jet to the end of the flight deck. Then we'd wheel the tarps pod under the jet and go to the Station 550 panel for Weapon Station 5. That panel is where the pod's controls and air conditioner hooked into. So that's where the wires that would power the pod and communicate with the cockpit hooked into, and where we'd interface with the aircraft's air conditioning system. To actually connect the pod, there are these dog bones, which are big steel dog bone looking hooks almost. We put one side of the hook into the aircraft and use a pin to lock it in place, and we'd have to jack this 17-foot long pod up to get it to connect with these tiny little dog bones that we would then pin on the pod side. We got very good at doing that, all of us in the tarps community. We all got really good at manipulating these big hydraulic skids with such finesse that we could hang the tarps pod within a few minutes. One of the cool things about being in the military is you kind of come up with some really great souvenirs. The first workup exercise is TESTA, Tailored Ships Training Availability. This is a little 2-week underway. It's basically an introduction. Aircraft carrier, here's your air wing. Air wing, here's your aircraft carrier. Shake hands, let's have a good fight. Unfortunately, the camera I had with me on Testa, the focus was less than ideal, so all the photos I have are pretty fuzzy. This was just an introductory period. I was basically, like every other newbie, trying to figure out how to exist and survive aboard ship while we were underway. The first major workup exercise and the second underway in the workup cycle to deployment is the Composite Training Unit Exercise, or COMP2X. VF-213 and Carrier Air Wing 11 boarded USS Carl Vinson for COMP2X in February and early March of 2001. This is where things start getting more serious. And yes, by the way, this does tie into the mementos in a minute. COMP2X is where the air wing and ship really start practicing integrating operations at sea. It was also a chance for newer people like myself to get all these basic flight deck and underway qualifications done. So I got my flight deck observer qualification done, several of the safety qualifications, firefighting qualifications, things like that. Following COMP2X, there was going to be a third workup exercise for the air wing at NAS Fallon. That was going to be a couple of weeks after COMP2X. Well, VF-213 sent a small detachment straight from Carl Vinson to Fallon because a few of our aircrew needed to beef up their flight hours. We sent a couple of jets and about 40 maintainers. For the second time in a row, I was the only person from the tarps and lantern shop to go to Fallon, but this time I knew what I was doing. The reason they sent me this time was because I had done so well on the ship, and frankly, I asked to go. This is where I got my first memento from VF-213, and that memento happened to be a shell casing. Well, while we're at Fallon, the guys out there were using the bombing range, but also practicing some gunnery, some strafing. Well, when they came back, AO3 Jake Frankel, one of our ordnance men, real good guy and had biceps the size of a ship's mast. Didn't want to get on that guy's bad side. He gave me a 20 millimeter shell casing from one of our gun shoots. This was not fired in combat, it was fired in training, but this did fire from one of our F-14s. That's kind of cool to get a hold of. Probably one of the coolest souvenirs I got, and arguably the single heaviest is the hook from a tail hook. This is the end of the tail hook. This is the piece that is attached to the hook, goes out back of the aircraft, drops down. This is the part that catches the arresting wire.
Gear down and locked. Add power. Power. All indicators green. Hold there. Hold it. Slightly left. In the groove. Looks good.
And like I said, it's heavy. It's got to be, this is high grade steel because it's got to stop a 60,000 pound aircraft going around 150 miles an hour down to zero within about 300 feet and in only 2 seconds. This one did not fly. When I was getting ready to leave the squadron, the guys in supply presented me this. The ones that actually trapped, that actually caught the jets, those would generally, again, go to the aircrew. And you can't argue that. The aircrew are the ones who are getting in the aircraft, shooting off the catapult, trapping on the deck, flying over the combat zone. So just the fact, though, that I was given one from supply, even if it never actually flew, is pretty huge. It's also a great way to, you want to do a workout, grab a couple tail hooks. Excuse me. Not all souvenirs or mementos in the Navy are so heavy or solid. Of all the personal accomplishments I did from my own career, separate from accomplishments as part of a command, this letter, this simple little letter, is the second of the two. This is the letter that advanced me to Chief Petty Officer. That was the second thing I am most proud of. This piece of cardboard is the first of the two things I'm most proud of in the Navy. This is my designation as a collateral duty inspector back at VF 213. A collateral duty inspector, or CDI, is a sailor in a maintenance shop, and it has to be E5 or above. E5 is your mid-level enlisted pay grade, and E5 is where you start really taking on supervisory responsibilities. CDIs are qualified to sign their shop's work as effectively safe for flight. The maintenance master chief will then collect all those reports, review them all, and then he or she will sign the entire aircraft off as safe for flight and hand the ignition keys to the aircrew. So for any maintainer, this is a huge deal. I started inquiring about working on my own CDI qualification while we were on CompTUX in late February of 2001. And my LPO, PH1 John Gornflow, and our photo officer, Lieutenant Jeff Wood, told me the best place to start that would be at Fallon, since I was going to be going there for that early det before the entire air wing came back. One of the reasons I'm so proud of it is earning that CDI is where I felt like I earned these. Earning that CDI is where I truly feel like I earned my place on that flight deck, on that flight line. I earned that tool pouch. To become a CDI, you basically have to get to know the entire aircraft. You have to spend time working with the electronics techs, with the electricians. You have to spend time working in the mech shop. I actually helped drop a couple engines because I really wanted to get hands on. And besides, this is dropping an F-14 engine. You think I'm going to miss that? This ensures you know where your systems fit in the overall big picture and all safety procedures. The CDI does not do the specific job. We would oversee the job and inspect it. That didn't mean I didn't work. If I was doing the job, I could not inspect my own work. Somebody else would have to oversee and inspect me. I had the entire qualification packet, which is a big packet of paper that takes you through all the aircraft systems you've got to know. And I went to all the shops I could, and I was getting signature after signature after signature. To get these signatures, I had to work a certain number of hours with these components so I could answer questions proving I knew what these components were and how they worked. But that's not the entire thing. To get the CDI qualification, you have to do that whole, we call it a PQS, Personal Qualification Standard. You have to get that whole package done. Then you submit it through your chain of command up to maintenance control. The next step is a written test. And I take tests really well, so the written test wasn't a problem. After the written test is an oral board that takes about, if I remember correctly from 25 years ago, 8 hours. You're interviewed by a panel including the maintenance master chief, the maintenance officer, the commanding officer, and some of the other chiefs in charge of the different maintenance shops. It is one of the hardest oral boards I have ever been through. We were underway for JTFX at this point. That's the Joint Task Force Exercise. JTFX is the final big graduation exercise for the strike group before going on deployment. So the squadron doesn't just stop for an 8-hour board for one little maintainer. We did 2 hours one day. A few days later, had to go back and sit for like an hour. A couple days after that, 2 or 3 hours. A couple days after that, the final hour or two. It's bad enough to sit an 8-hour board, but when you're breaking it up like that, it seems like it'd be easy because, you get a break. But you're stretching out the stress over almost a week. The commanding officer at the time was Commander Chip Biff King. He was there for the whole 8 hours. Like I said, we were breaking it up. And he hit me with a lot of good questions, just like the maintenance officer and the master chief did. After the final session of the board, I didn't feel bad about it, but I didn't feel great. Well, Master Chief Westmoreland and Commander King came up to congratulate me that, hey, you passed. Master Chief Westmoreland, our maintenance master chief, I had a lot of respect for him. I was also terrified of him, if I'm going to be honest. His congratulations meant a lot. This is the master chief, the maintenance master chief. Commander King really kind of got to me, though, when he congratulated me. He told me that he really had some reservations about me taking the CDI test and sitting the oral board when I did, because I had moved so fast to get the qualifications, get all the training for it signed off. Skipper King told me he wasn't rooting for me to fail. He didn't expect me to fail, and he knew I wouldn't be sitting this board if the maintenance master chief hadn't thought I was qualified. But he admitted he'd only been cautiously optimistic and was pleasantly surprised and impressed that I had passed and done so well. My ego just went through the roof, and if you know me at all, you know my ego does not need any help getting big. It's interesting how a simple piece of paper can reduce years of effort and study and work into just a single page saying, you're a collateral duty inspector, you're a chief petty officer. But if you know how to read those, and you know what goes in behind getting these pieces of paper, those worlds open back up. So getting that CDI qualification meant I'd earned my place in naval aviation. It's kind of corny to say it like that, but it meant a lot, and it still does. I really didn't think I was going to achieve anything else personally that meant so much to me until I put on chief. I miss my days in aviation. I miss working on those airplanes. But I earned my place, I earned my tool pouch, I earned my jersey, and I earned my safety wire pliers. Anthony Gaiani, call sign Gandhi, was executive officer of VF-213 when I reported aboard in the year 2000. He became commanding officer of the Black Lions during a regularly scheduled change of command in December of 2001. Gaiani retired as a rear admiral and shared some of his memories riding Tomcats at Afterburner with me and asked me to pass them on to you. I was a Rio and I flew all the variants. I was a flight instructor twice, and I'm also a Top Gun graduate. The Alpha variant had a 5-stage or zone afterburner. You could physically feel a slight jolt when you went up to zone 5, full afterburner. The GE engine used by the Bravo and Delta models had a much more powerful blower. It's a real jolt in the cockpit when you plug in those blowers. It feels like you're hitting a speed bump in your car at high speed, except the jolt isn't from the bottom of your vehicle. It's a sudden shove forward in your ejection seat. At night, although those blowers are 50 plus feet behind you, the plume of pure energy is so bright it lit up the cockpit. The F-14 Alpha was a bit underpowered, to put it mildly. That's why you see the F-14 Alphas having to go to full afterburner on the flight deck. Afterburner is simply dumping raw fuel into the engine's exhaust stream. That raw fuel lights off and basically turns the engine into a rocket, so it kicks the aircraft forward with a great deal of speed and power. The Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engine was actually intended for the F-111 bomber, but it was put into the F-14 Alpha. This power plant was not the favorite of aircrew. According to Rear Admiral Anthony Gaiani, an F-14 radar intercept officer and a former commanding officer of mine, quote, "The TF-30 was very unreliable and easy to stall, generally at the worst times. There was a saying that went, if it says Pratt & Whitney, it better say Martin Baker. Pratt & Whitney made the engine, Martin Baker made our ejection seats." The F-14 Bravo and Delta models were upgraded to the GE F-110-400 engine, which was powerful enough you didn't have to go to afterburner on the catapult. You only had to go to what's called military power. Essentially, military power is full power before the afterburner lights off. I don't have any great shots. I never got to see an F-14 roar up with that rocket fire shooting out the back because the Delta models I worked on were powerful enough they didn't have to do that. One of my early shots of an F-14 during one of our workup exercises, the Joint Task Force Exercise, or JTFX, looks a little like an afterburner is lighting off, but it's not. That's just, that fire in the cans you see is just the engine burning normally at military power. But it still creates a real sense of dynamism, and it was one of the only shots I ever got that showed any kind of fire in the tail end of an F-14 on launch. So it adds a lot of drama. Plus, that one flight deck guy running out there as the aircraft launches adds a lot more dynamic energy to the image. Other images I got, especially in black and white using infrared film, you can see the heat trail coming out of the engine. So you can, that shows you the power that they are producing, but you didn't get that gorgeous tail fire because we didn't need it. First time I got to see a jet go into afterburner was at Fallon, Nevada. Now, you're probably wondering, why is the Navy going to Fallon, Nevada? That's a desert. There's nothing to do with water around Nevada. Reason we're out there is a bombing range that we can use to drop live ordnance for training out in a safe area. That's why Naval Air Station Fallon exists. One day after we launched the jets, we were hopped into the duty van and we drove out to the bombing range. Before you say anything, there is a safe viewing area that's designated for people to watch. And as they finished their run, one run, I had one shot left in my camera. Remember, this was the days of film, not digital. I didn't have thousands of images I could shoot on a card before the cards filled up. I only had 36 images available on that roll of film. And when I was out, I was out. I had one image left I hadn't shot. Well, the aircraft circled overhead and came over us, head back to base, but they did a flyby over us. And as they went over us, they kicked it into afterburner. And we kind of heard it before we realized what was going on, but you hear that roar, you start to see the fire in the engines. And I pulled the camera up and fired off that one last exposure I had. And I caught it right in the middle of the sequence. One aircraft, you can see the afterburners are flaring in the engines. The other aircraft hasn't actually kicked into afterburner just yet. So the first time I ever got an afterburner photo. It's interesting that one jet's in them and the other jet hasn't quite got there just yet. So I only ever got that one afterburner photo in flight. But I got to see afterburners going off a lot. We would occasionally have to run the afterburners on the flight deck for maintenance, just like running the engines or anything else. What we would do is we'd back the jet out and park it over water. We would then chain the F-14 to the flight deck with chains that are big enough that they could keep Godzilla from going anywhere. One of the aviation machinist mates, the mechs, an AD, would get in the cockpit to run the engines while these afterburner turns are being done. This isn't a tarps or lantern function. I don't have any direct systems involved, but I could still be up there to lend a hand. And besides, we're about to run the afterburners on an F-14. Do you really think I'm going to miss that? So I'm standing there like everybody else and, arms crossed, tool pouch on, looking cool. Well, at least I think I'm looking cool. When they run the engine up to full military power and then punch it into afterburner, maybe 10, 15, 20 feet away from me and pointing that way off the ship. As soon as those afterburners kicked on, a number of things just hit me all at once. The first of which was the shockwave. As soon as those things lit off, there was, best I can describe it, a subsonic whump that just right in the chest. The next thing I realized was it was freaking hot. It doesn't matter that I'm 15, 20, 30 feet away. It doesn't matter that it's aimed out over the water. The heat that thing put out was incredible. And the noise was just indescribable. You've got hearing protection on, but this thing is so loud and so powerful that your bones are kind of transmitting the sound at this point. Being next to those jets when they go up to military power for launch on the catapults, that was impressive. That was almost frightening. But that was like being next to a jet aircraft going up to power. Being next to it when the afterburner lit off, that's like being next to a Saturn V rocket going to the moon. Another moment in my career that I can't tell you what the hell I was thinking, because clearly I was not thinking anything about photography. Not once during any of those. Okay, we refer to these as maintenance turns. We're turning the engine, so it's a turn. Not once during any of those maintenance turns did I ever think about getting the stupid camera out and taking pictures of the afterburner going off during this maintenance work. I guess at that time I was just so caught up in being a maintainer and being part of this pageant, this mechanical ballet, that it didn't occur to me to pick up the camera and take a stupid picture. So I've got no footage of that, no stills, nothing. We get back to Oceania, of course, we still got to do the same thing occasionally. We got to run these jets up to afterburner once in a while for maintenance and for checks, but you can't do that just out in the open in a populated area. These things are way too loud. You run an F-14 up to an afterburner out in Oceania, you're going to deafen everybody in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, and probably 3 other counties. We would take the aircraft to the Hush House. Hush House is a special hangar that's enclosed with a big old exhaust port. You aim the aircraft, its engines into the exhaust port, so you can run them up to afterburner and the exhaust goes up and is vented out. And of course, like I said, the hangar contains the sound. Now, if being next to one of those things on the flight deck was loud in the open air, inside the Hush House, it was brutal, but it was really cool. F-14s kneel. When the jet comes up to the catapult, the front landing gear actually lowers, so the nose kind of points down a bit. This reduces stress on the nose gear on the front end of the airframe during the launch. Well, we kneel the jet to do the afterburner checks on the flight deck. Now, part of how we had tied it down. It didn't matter if the afterburner was level or going slightly up because you're out in the middle of the ocean. At the Hush House, you've got to make sure that afterburner is pointed directly into that exhaust port. So in the middle of this big haze gray concrete floor, there's a yellow square. And that is the marker of where any aircraft in there, you put their nose gear on that yellow square. But that yellow square is a hydraulic platform. So we'd park the F-14 on it, kneel the jet, then that square would lift up to bring the jet back to level. One time I went, I actually finally remembered to take the camera. So I got some pictures of one of our jets at afterburner in the Hush House. This is jet nose number 111. The nose number and a bureau number are two different things. The nose number of an aircraft is like the license plate on your car. As the aircraft cycles through different squadrons as it goes through its lifetime, that nose number changes. In my day, this aircraft that you see in these photos was 111. We call it triple sticks. The bureau number of an aircraft is like the VIN number on your car, whereas the license plate changes as you sell the car and it goes to different owners. The VIN number stays with the car forever and identifies it. A bureau number is the permanent, effective serial number that identifies a naval aircraft. Triple sticks, well, in my day, the aircraft that was nose number 111, triple sticks, its bureau number, or BUNO, is 161159. I've mentioned this aircraft a couple of times. That aircraft is on display here in the Naval Aviation Museum. Being enveloped in the roar of an F-14 Delta afterburner inside that Hush House is not an experience you ever forget. It's terrifying. It's thrilling. It is one of those moments that, for me at least, really brought home the reality that the Navy wasn't just a job, it was an adventure. I had also gotten duck diver qualified, tow tractor qualified, and brake rider qualified. Duck diver, you jump down the intakes with the engine off to inspect the intakes, inspect the fan blades. Tow tractor driver, you have to get qualified if you're going to haul these jets around on the flight line. And on the flight deck, ship's air department personnel will tow the aircraft around. But back at the beach, we do it. I had gotten tow tractor qualified. I'd also gotten brake rider qualified, which means I was able to sit in the front seat of the jet while it's being towed on the flight deck or flight line and operate the brake if the tow tractor and the aircraft separated or the tow tractor itself lost its brakes. When we took triple sticks to the hush house this night, the night I got these photos, I drove. I towed that aircraft from the flight line all the way to the hush house. AM2 Joshua Mize actually drove her back because I was in photo mode at that point taking photos, which is what you do when you're in photo mode. Being a maintainer, I never got to fly in the Tomcats. I can say I rode in them since I was a brake rider, and I'd be in that front seat managing the brakes while being towed, but let's be honest, riding in an F-14 while it's being towed on the flight line or even the flight deck is not anything in the same league as our aircrew who got to fly. I may not have had the exciting experience of seeing an F-14 go to full afterburner on the catapult, but my time in aviation maintenance was very sadly short because after I left F-14s, I went to shore duty, what I thought was going to be temporary shore duty, then back to F-14s. But while I was on shore duty, they retired the excuse me. While I was on shore duty, they retired the F-14, and the world changed. I will never forget that I got to stand next to an F-14 Delta Tomcat at full afterburner on a flight deck and later in the hush house. You stand next to one of those at full afterburner, and you will understand why these aircraft can go supersonic. Chip King, callsign Biff, was commanding officer of VF-213 when I arrived at the squadron in August of 2000. Chip retired as a commander and works as a test pilot to this day. He sent me an account of his experiences with the two-engine the Tomcat used, the original Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engine and the later GE F-110 engine, which is pretty much what the Tomcat had been designed to use in the first place. The commander asked me to read these recollections for him. Over my 20-year career, I had the pleasure to fly all three models of the F-14, the Alphas, Bravos, and Deltas. I had just over 3,000 hours and 969 arrested landings in the three variants of the Tomcat, so you can imagine I have spent some time in afterburner. The only advantage to flying the F-14 Alpha with its TF-30 engine was that it had only two throttle positions, idle and full Zone 5 afterburner when dogfighting. You were tempting fate jockeying the throttle around. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, but you had to know what you were doing and where you were in the flight envelope. Nearly 30% of all accidents in the F-14 Alpha were attributed to the Pratt & Whitney TF-30 engine. Jet engine compressors require the airflow to be subsonic at all times. The F-14's inlet is the size of a refrigerator. To reduce the airflow's speed to subsonic velocities, the Tomcat utilized a series of ramps inside the inlet. These ramps decelerated the airflow before it was ingested by the compressor. The TF-30 engine was prone to failure when this airflow was even slightly disturbed, whether from a high angle of attack or some other incident. This made it a somewhat risky engine to fly. I remember one of my flights working up for carrier qualifications back in the VF-101. I was paired with a student Rio nearing the end of his training, and we were flying out of Naval Air Station Oceana in the middle of the night in preparation for our initial carrier qualifications in the F-14 Alpha. We were in a climbing right turn on a southeasterly heading, and the aircraft was in full afterburner. We needed to burn off some fuel, otherwise the jet would exceed the max landing weight allowed at Fentress Field, where we simulated carrier landings. During the climbing turn, we experienced a right engine compressor stall. We heard a single loud bang, and the airframe shuddered as the canopy was engulfed in a brightly illuminated cloud. Basically, it looked like the afterburner was coming out the wrong end of the airplane. Given this was associated with the action of coming out of afterburner, I wasn't overly concerned. The young Rio didn't know it was induced by my action instead of a serious mechanical fault, but thankfully he hung in there with me. We continued down to Fentress to conduct training and returned to Oceana uneventfully about 45 minutes later. I followed up with the maintenance desk the next day to see what might have been the culprit. If I remember correctly, it was the handling bleed valves being out of tolerance. TF-30 was a very touchy engine. The GE F-110-400 was a major upgrade for the Tomcat. Generating over 23,000 pounds of thrust at military power and 30,000 pounds of thrust in full afterburner, it was the engine the Tomcat had truly been designed for. Hell, at lower fuel loads, the GE F-110 actually increased the aircraft's climb rate by nearly 60%. Most importantly, it significantly improved the reliability and safety of the jet for the sailors maintaining it and the aircrew flying it. A funny anecdote dates back to September of 1999 when Sports Illustrated writer Rick Riley was given a flight while he was visiting the Black Lions. He was nearly speechless afterwards, finding himself only able to describe the Tomcat as a, quote, ridiculously powerful $60 million weapon. I experienced a serious engine failure with the GE F-110 during my time in the VF-142 Ghostwriters. However, this event actually demonstrated the increased reliability and safety margin of the engine. I was flying a post-maintenance check flight, and we were conducting a supersonic run at high altitude when the left engine suffered a catastrophic failure associated with the afterburner nozzle. The deceleration threw my Rio and I hard forward, our seat harnesses keeping us from impacting our instruments. Meanwhile, there was a considerable yaw to the left. The failure was easily identifiable and the corrective action was instinctual. Retard both throttles back to military power and then down smoothly to idle. Unlike the TF-30, the GE F-110 engine utilized full authority digital engine, or FADAC control. This let the engine computer sense the abnormality and automatically adjust fuel flow and RPMs without pilot action. The yaw was a result of the FADAC doing what it was designed to do. This caused a momentary asymmetrical thrust because the right engine was still in full afterburner. What we witnessed at altitude led us to expect massive damage to the engine. Thankfully, upon landing back at Oceana, we learned the damage was limited. The engine only required a new afterburner section and a nozzle. The Tomcat was a great aircraft with the original TF-30 engine, but it became both a significantly greater and safer aircraft once those massive GE F-110 power plants were finally installed. Another one of the mementos you can get underway on a deployment is a cruise jacket. It is almost like a yearbook, a cruise book of patches that tell the story of that deployment. This is another story about that barter economy. Several of these patches did not come with the jacket. I bought them separately from different vendors and traded a number of sodas, traded a few photographs, and traded actually just lending my hands to help the guys in the PR shop sew. The aircrew survival equipment men, called the PRs, a nod to their original days as parachute riggers, they do all the sewing. In fact, those guys actually taught me a lot of how to sew, and it's a skill that I think all sailors should have. Learning how to sew increased my value in the barter economy in later deployments because not only could I trade photos or go buy a soda or two, I could sew patches on. When I was aboard Ponce, and when I was later deployed aboard the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, I got a lot of free soda. I got a lot of free help on other things because, oh, don't wait till we get to port. I can sew those patches on for you. Just give me a couple of days. So it took a bit of horse trading, but I got my jacket put together the way I wanted it. One aspect of military life is a joke, but it's a very true one, and that's why we laugh about it so much. And it's the aspect you never see in the movies or on TV. It's best summed up in Four words: hurry up and wait. Officers learn it at their basic training. Enlisted personnel, we learn it at our basic training. Hurry up and wait. The first thing anybody does, doesn't matter if you're officer or enlisted, when we get to our basic training, the first thing we're doing is waiting. There's a there's a logical necessity to learning to hurry up and wait and doing it at basic training. Because once you get to the fleet, there's a truckload of downtime, especially in aviation. In the movies and TV, you see those airplanes launching and all of us running around the flight deck or the flight line, fixing things, getting things moving, equipment into place, airplanes taking off. And then the camera and the story usually follows the airplanes, but it never pays attention to us on the flight deck who are now going, we do work when the aircraft are gone because there's always aircraft that are back on the deck or back on the flight line if we're at the beach. But there's only so much you can do. Hangar space on shore and hangar bay space on ship is limited. So the only aircraft that actually live in the hangar bay on the ship or the hangar on shore are either those that are in incredibly bad shape, what we call hangar queens, or those undergoing inspections. And there's a number of inspections an aircraft lives through every year, and that's to ensure the safety of the aircrew and the maintainers working on it. So these aircraft go through multiple inspections a year. And these are different inspections. There's the 7-day, and the 7-day inspection we could do on the flight line at shore or on the roof on the ship, and we call the flight deck the roof. And it's a 7-day inspection. Every 7 days, there's certain things we inspect, and every shop has parts to inspect. There's a 14-day inspection, a 28-day inspection, a 56-day inspection, and others. For the bigger ones, where we start opening up the back of the aircraft and exposing the internal components to the elements, those inspections we'd bring the aircraft into the hangar or the hangar bay. Other inspections happen every so many flight hours. One of the fun ones to watch was drop checking the landing gear. We'd bring the jet into the hangar or hangar bay, put it up on jacks, and cycle the landing gear while we inspected the mechanisms. But only so many people can work on the aircraft at any one time, even if it's down for hard maintenance or in one of those inspections. The rest of us are. That first 2 weeks when I was at NAS Fallon with the squadron, when I had to wind up kind of getting shot out on that to represent the shop on that little deck because all our other personnel were spoken for, I read 2 Harry Potter novels cover to cover. Now, I do read fast, but I read these books mostly in the hangar between flights while the aircraft were gone. And that was with the gang around me in the maintenance department already starting my flight deck training, my basic maintenance training. So even with that training work going on, there was still that much downtime. Sailors are famous for being able to sleep anywhere, and we all got a lot of good naps in on the flight line, in the hangar, or in our shops aboard ship. We spent a lot of time swapping sea stories and tall tales. Played a lot of card games. I learned how to play poker and spades, and also found out I'm really not interested in those games, although I used to love to sit around and watch and take bets with myself on who was going to win. Anything to make the time go by. No matter how much we worked, aircrew or enlisted, there was always a lot of downtime, a lot of hurry up and waiting. Another aspect of maintenance that enlisted personnel have to really get through our heads is how we handle the equipment. Told you a story in Mechanical Ballet Chapter 1, or Act 1, excuse me, about Bruno throwing this thing on his shoulder and running. Funny story, and we kind of did that on the beach because we're on shore, but that was really not the right way to do things because when you're aboard ship, if you got something heavy up here, your center of gravity is way high. You're on a ship now. Granted, carriers don't move a whole lot, but they're still a ship. They still move. That can throw you off balance. Onboard ship, we all made sure we carried everything like a football because that kept our center of gravity lower. We were more stable. It was just safer. Had a young airman who insisted on carrying things like this. Now, I get it was easier to carry them like that. It's already up here. You can hand it up to the cockpit. Nothing I said would get it through his head to stop carrying components over his head. They repeatedly told him aboard ship we do it this way, even if back at the beach we play a little loose with that. Nothing worked. Hit on a brilliant idea. Start pulling through the paperwork of the tarps and lantern and other associated systems, and holy Toledo, would you look at that? So I got him to the shop that evening and said, hey, do you want to know what's going to happen to you if when you're carrying one of these components like this, you trip and it hits the deck and shatters or goes overboard and drops 3 or 4 miles down to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean? The Lantern Pod's cockpit control box by itself costs more than $1 million. I told him, you are carrying a component worth more than $1 million over your head across an operating flight deck like you're in a vaudeville act. After that, he stopped carrying things over his head like he was in some Navy circus. He started carrying things like a football. Makes sense. I mean, nobody in their right mind wants to trip, drop something, shatter it, and be on the hook for
$1 million.
The Adventure of the Screaming Idiot is one of my favorite sea stories from that deployment from in 0102. I'm going to withhold the names of those involved because it's also an embarrassing story for a number of people, especially the aircrew. VF-213 will carrier Air Wing 11 in Carl Vinson. We were primarily, our primary bailiwick was the night missions. We launched all the night strikes, but we're at war. We're supporting day operations as well. This was one of those days we're launching some daytime strike missions. We had 3 jets we were spinning up, maybe 4, I'm pretty sure it was just 3. 2 of them were on the fantail, all the way after the ship. The one myself and my airmen were doing the pre-flight on at this moment was just forward of elevator 4. That jet that we're doing the pre-flight had lantern pods, so he and I are helping the rest of the team do the pre-flight, do the startup sequence, and then the Rio will signal to us that he or she, I can't remember if it was a he or she, was ready to do the lantern pod. If we had a TARPS mission, photo recon mission, once the Rio was ready to pre-flight the TARPS pod, they would give us a, imitate camera signal. For the lantern pod, they would give us a little laser gun, because it's a laser targeting system. Before we got to that point, one of the Airedales, one of my fellow maintainers from the jets in the back, comes running up and hits me on the shoulder, yells into my ear cup, "Sparky, the TARPS pod's not working on that jet." A couple thousand things went through my head immediately. What the hell is a TARPS pod doing on the jet? It was not scheduled on the flight schedule. Oh wait, we're at war. For all I know, the theater commander or the admiral of the strike group said, I need a TARPS mission, I need photo recon right now. Myself and my airmen are working on this jet, but we're not the only people in the shop. It's entirely possible the other guys in the shop got the word we need a TARPS mission right now, got a pod put together, up to the deck, up on the roof, on the jet. But if that happened, why aren't they there working it? Obviously something is really wrong. And I go take off and run toward the aft end of the ship with this other Airedale. So we come running up to the jet, and I can see the Rio, the back seater, waving. I was like, I hold my hand up, I got it, sir. I look under the jet. I stand up and I look at the other maintainer who came and got me. I look under the jet. I stand up and look at the maintainer. Do you see a TARPS pod on this jet? He looks under. Oh man, I'm sorry, I meant the lantern pod. Okay, remember, the Rio is signaling photo, not lantern. I look under the right wing. Do you see a lantern pod on this jet? My fellow maintainer looks there. Under, we got the cranial, the goggles, so you can just see a little bit of skin right here, but beet red. Hang on. He runs up to one of the guys who's got a radio and it's plugged into the jet because they're talking to the aircrew. I didn't hear what he said, but obviously he told him this jet's not configured with the TARPS or lantern pod. I was watching the Rio during that conversation, and obviously I couldn't hear what happened in the cockpit, but I saw the pilot look over his shoulder back at the back seater and the Rio. You idiot. That's the profound thought that went through my head. You idiot. Fellow maintainer comes back. Hey, Sparky, remember we're yelling through the ear cups and the cranial. Sparky, I'm sorry, man. I don't know what I was thinking. I said, I know what you were thinking because you're a screaming idiot, but not as much of a screaming idiot as that stupid Rio in that aircraft. I left him standing there and I ran forward back to the jet I had been working on, finished the pre-flight sequence, we got the jets up to the catapult, and got the mission launched on time. That evening I was having dinner on Carl Vinson's forward mess decks. An aircraft carrier has 2 mess decks, one aft and one forward. While I was eating, and I remember I was having a cheeseburger and fries. My buddy happened to see me sitting there. He came down and grabbed a hamburger as well, so he sat down to eat with me. And he looked real chagrined. He apologized again for just completely spacing on the whole thing and not realizing there wasn't a tarp or a lantern pod on the jet. I laughed and said, well, hey man, you're still a screaming idiot, but you're a screaming idiot I like. It's that aircrew I've got some real problems with. And he asked me why. I said, well, think about it. That Rio and that pilot, they sat through a mission briefing. They were specifically told what they were going to do, and what they were going to do did not involve tarps or lantern. They come up to the flight deck and do their pre-flight walk around of the aircraft so they could see there's no tarps or lantern pod on that jet. More to the point even than that, when they got in the cockpit, that Rio could see that the space at his left side where the tarps or the lantern pod control boxes went was empty and was blanked off by us because there was no pod on that aircraft. So if he sat through a mission briefing that told him there was no tarps or lantern on his aircraft, he did a pre-flight walk around supposedly examining that aircraft, and got in the cockpit and looked over to see there was no control box, then what the hell was he thinking when he called out that the tarps pod wasn't working? My buddy just kind of stared at me after I had laid all that out and said, holy, yeah, wow. I'm sure the skipper and probably the XO had a long talk with that Rio, if not that aircraft's aircrew, about situational awareness that night. But the adventure of the Screaming Idiot sticks in my head because it is the single most absurd event I ever experienced when I worked on F-14 Tomcats. Going to sea is a life that allows you to experience things most people will only ever see on TV or in the movies. There's nothing like watching dolphins jumping to the bow wave of your ship. Unless you're on the flight deck of an aircraft carrier and you see whales. Seen a humpback whale in the wild a couple of times, but I've only ever seen a humpback breach once. It was another one of those days during Operation Enduring Freedom where we were hurrying up and waiting because the flight deck was empty, maintenance was done, training was done. I was up there talking to my leading petty officer, John Gornflow. I'm facing to the port. I'm looking to the port. He's looking starboard. So behind me is the ship's island and the ocean. We're talking and chit-chatting, and he's in the middle of a sentence. He just stops, his eyes go wide. I whip around, and off the starboard side of USS Carl Vinson was a humpback whale breaching, one fin way out. And the whale falls over, disappears behind the ship. Big old splash comes up. No way to describe the feeling of seeing that. A humpback whale just breached right next to my aircraft carrier, and I got to see it. Several times we wound up in the middle of pods of sperm whales. Came up to the flight deck one day, and we had strike missions planned, but we were kind of having to figure out a new course because we were in the middle of a pod of whales, and all you could see was just the humps in the water kind of paralleling the ship. And, okay, what are those? I can just see a hump, and then I saw the spout, and a sperm whale spouts forward at an angle. Every other whale goes vertical. Some are vertical in a V, some are vertical in a single, but the sperm whale's blowhole is on the front of its head where its head curves down. Saw someone spout, like, those are sperm whales. This is cool. Just a pot of whales around us. And it happened 2 or 3 times. We're out there sailing, all of a sudden, whales. The ships in the strike group will all slow down, and then we set extra lookouts. These whale watches keep an eye out for the animals. It damages the ship to hit a whale. Those are big. It also kind of damages the whale, which is just as bad. There is a lot of maintenance that happens during the launch cycle. These are complex machines, and the Tomcats were already 30 years old when I touched them. It was easy for them to break, so that's one reason why you have a crew of maintainers around them during the launch cycle. If something breaks, we can fly in there, pardon the pun, and hopefully fix it, get the jet off on time. If we're at the beach, the jet still needs to go within a certain amount of time because there's a mission to be flown. Training mission, doesn't matter, it's a mission. But there's not the same level of pressure to get it fixed because we're on our section of the flight line. So if that jet is hard down and we got to get the air crew to another jet and get another jet spun up, we're not crowding out other people. We're not impacting the movement around the flight line. Flight deck, whole different story. If an aircraft doesn't move on time, it can block up the flight deck and negatively impact the entire air wing with all the efficiency of a high velocity potato stopping up your plumbing. It wasn't just the Tomcats. Plenty of times I saw not just our guys, but the F-18 guys, the S-3 guys, their engine mechanics fly in to try and get an engine running again, or the structural mechanics rushing forward to plug a leak and try to get the hydraulic system recharged in time. Us tarps and lantern guys. The tarps pod suddenly throws a fault, or the lantern pod gives a blinky light, and we got to get over there and fix it. And we're talking to the air crew with hand signals because we don't have radios. And if the hand signals don't work, we get one of the guys with the radio who'll plug in the jet, and then we're relaying, playing the telephone game. Got to happen. Most of the time, though, we got those jets to the catapult on time. If an aircraft throws a fault during the launch cycle, or as often happen, multiple faults during the launch cycle, you find out really fast who's good at doing what under pressure. I was good with a lot, but not wires. Electrical wires are part of our reconnaissance cameras, and I was decent fixing them in the shop. But the one time I tried to fix an electrical wire on a jet while it was turning almost ended up being a disaster. The good news is it wasn't one of my wires. The glove vane was a retractable airfoil that was automatically deployed when the F-14 hit about Mach 1.4. The idea of the glove vane was that it provided a little more stability and a little more lift at the front of the aircraft during supersonic flight. It proved to be more trouble than it was worth. By the time the F-14s were transitioning from the Alpha to the Delta to the Bravo model, and of course later the Deltas, the glove vanes had largely been disabled. And in the Bravo models and the Delta models, they were eliminated completely. But we still called that forward end of the fuselage above, just forward of the wings, we still called that the glove vane because that was just that part of the aircraft. One evening, it was during Operation Enduring Freedom. I don't remember exactly what month. It was October, November, maybe early December of '01. We were spinning up the jets for an evening launch. I worked the day check at this point, so I was on deck around 7:30 to 8 in the morning till about 6:30 to 7:30 at night. That was my 12 hours on. This work schedule ensured that the day check team, we were responsible for the first and last launches during daylight hours. Daylight's getting low at this point, though. Evening's coming on. Aircraft are spinning up. We've got our cranials on. There's noise around. There's aircraft forward of us whose tail end are pointed toward us. So we're standing in the jet exhaust and we're not so close we're getting burned, but you're getting buffeted a little. And there's just the normal chaos. When the aircrew signaled to the electricians that some wire was throwing a fault, they had one of those little blinky lights and one of those little circuit breakers that pop out. And all the thing the aircrew just love to see right before they're about to go launch. The electricians pull up a step stool and try to get up there because it was either a step stool or one of their toolboxes. I don't remember, honestly. I just remember they stepped up on something, opened a panel there in the glove vane area, and whatever the wire was, it was actually broke. It was down in there. It's fixable. We could still get the aircraft to the catapult, but it was kind of buried in there. I happened to be standing there and they asked me, Spark, can you get in there and fix that? Because you've got the long arms. The engineers who built the F-14 were brilliant, but they never had to work on it. Many of the access panels we had to get into to do maintenance were small. So there's many times where we're sticking our hands and our tools into a place that we can't see. We're feeling the wires, we're feeling the connectors. And so I jump up there, get the soldering iron and put it inside the jet, get the other tools, reach in there, and I'm trying to feel around and I can kind of occasionally see. To save my life, I could not fix the damn wire. Clock is ticking. Tell them, guys, I can't do this. It's just not working. Either somebody else tries it or this jet goes hard down and we swap the air crew and the ordnance over to another aircraft. Another guy gets up there and he's a little shorter, gets his arms in there, starts trying to work, but he needs help. So if you've ever seen a rugby match, rugby players to get up and help one of their teammates get up high will grab each other by the shorts, use his pants, and just hoist him up. Me and one other guy grabbed this young guy, this young electrician, by his pants and hoisted him up a couple of inches to give him what he needed to get his arms far enough in to fix the aircraft. He got it fixed. We buttoned up the jet, got it to the catapult, mission goes on. Broken wires, leaking hydraulics, electronic faults, just another night at the office when you're in aviation. Life on the flight deck is exciting. It's a high-speed, low-drag, high-intensity environment when you're not hurrying up and waiting because all the airplanes are gone, or it's a no-fly day and you've gotten all the maintenance you can do done and all the training you can do done. Hurry up and wait is very much a part of the military culture, but it is punctuated by moments of extreme, adrenaline-pumping excitement, and I miss being on that roof. Not all my Tomcat memories are centered around the cockpit. Some of the funniest experiences I had were off the flight deck with my fellow officers. I was a lieutenant assigned to VF-84. We were aboard the Teddy Roosevelt back in 1993 or 94, and we were on a med cruise about to make a liberty call to the island of Rhodes, Greece. A Westpac or Western Pacific cruise covers vast distances, so you might not get a port call for weeks or even months while at sea. So when you do set foot in your first Liberty port while on a Westpac, you might feel like you've earned the right to a beer, restaurants, meeting the locals, and generally having a good time. Med cruises, on the other hand, involve a transit across the Atlantic, meaning you have your first port visit within just a week or maybe two. Therefore, it's understandable to wonder why so many junior officers on their first cruise wound up causing so many Liberty incidents in Marseille, France, that the skipper threatened to put them all under house arrest aboard the ship. The incidents were mostly generated by too much alcohol, resulting in the kind of ungentlemanly conduct you might imagine. So at the next JOPA, or Junior Officer Protection Association, meeting, we struggled to devise a strategy to not have the skipper confine us to the ship. Someone suggested something truly radical: drink less. I offered the following suggestion. When we do get to our next port, the island of Rhodes, instead of going straight to the first bar and spending our time there, why don't we rent a car, drive around the island, and see what happens? Who knows, we might have a real adventure. To my amazement, about a half a dozen guys decided to join me. This was unfortunate because I had already rented the smallest car I could find, which was something like a Greek Yugo, and it also had no air conditioning. No problem, maybe summer in the Med, but we'll open the windows and everything will be great. What could go wrong? We packed in like a clown car in the circus, and off we went along what we thought was the coast road. We expected to see castles, tavernas, nightclubs, and beaches full of young Greek women. What we actually saw were endless fields, the occasional shepherd with his flock, and the odd seagull. But that's it. By the second hour of our drive, the junior officers were getting hungry and bored and let me know I was responsible for this disaster. I assured them things were bound to pick up, just be patient. By the third hour, we were running low on gas and even lower on morale. Then we saw it. A big, beautiful Greek taverna with a full parking lot, which we firmly believed meant that food and wine would be delicious, plentiful, and cheap. Parking our car, we hurried to the gate and waited for the hostess to come and seat us. It took a few minutes for her to arrive, and as none of us spoke Greek and none of them apparently spoke English, I rubbed my belly and pointed to my mouth, which I hoped meant we're here to eat, and not something that would get us killed. The hostess smiled and took the seven of us to a table. In just a moment we were given pitchers of water and wine. As much wine as we wanted, apparently. Morale began to rise, and so did my poll numbers. Maybe I should be in charge of port calls for the junior officers. Maybe the skipper will defer to my wisdom in handling my fellow young aircrew. And then plates of food began to appear. Bread, cheese, salads, then fish courses, vegetables, rice dishes. The other officers began to ask why we never had a menu, and I had a ready answer. Some of these tavernas don't have a menu, they just serve whatever they're making that day. Everybody seemed content with that answer, and so the courses, the wine, and even beer kept coming. Pork and lamb were next, and it was all delicious. And then the lobsters arrived, and the mood began to change. One officer said, "I know what's going on here. They know we're Americans. They think we're rich, and they'll serve us anything they can to charge us anything they want to." The other officers began to argue among themselves about how they were going to handle the enormous bill we were expecting. And while they were arguing, dessert was served. It was slices of cake. How strange, I thought. Who serves slices of cake? As I pondered this question, the doors to the taverna opened, and the bride and groom appeared to loud applause from the guests. This wasn't a taverna. It was someone's house, and we had crashed a Greek wedding. While looking at each other in shocked silence, I noticed many of the guests around us were staring at us and whispering. A few minutes later, a Greek woman, who was also one of the guests, walked over to us and asked if anything was wrong. Before I could apologize, I blurted out, "We had no idea this was a wedding. We're obviously not invited. Why were we seated?" She answered, "You stood at the gate to the house, and when the lady of the house approached, you rubbed your stomach, telling us you were hungry. It's our custom to feed hungry strangers." We apologized profusely, thanked anyone who would listen, and put a huge pile of cash on the table, and then we got out of there. We refueled and drove back to the ship in silence, mainly because most of the guys were asleep after all that wine. Once we got back aboard ship, I made sure that I never said a word about this to the skipper.